So now I've just about reached my final verdict, by the way. This is Mark Smith, by the way. I'm a man with Asperger's syndrome who lives in northeastern Massachusetts, in Middlesex County, specifically, near in Carlisle, two towns over from my hometown of Groton, Massachusetts. At first I thought my take on capital punishment regarding people, the mentally challenged or people with disabilities, is that only the most severe of disabilities should be exempt from. Actually, I believe that the mentally challenged ought to be exempt from the capital punishment or death penalty unless the only catch to that is that they need to be put in some facility keeping them separate from the rest of the outside world. Such as that facility featured in that movie Sling Blade that came out when I was a teenager. I think that for instance, there are, just as there are good Aspies and bad Aspies, and some men and women with Asperger's syndrome are kinder and gentler than others, and some are just mean and nastier than others. There could be mentally challenged people who, to some extent, know what they're doing. I think they have to weigh it on how much they believe the mentally challenged know what they're doing. Now, it's a yes and no. It's kind of like my take on abortion. It's a case-by-case basis. But for the most part, some mentally challenged people, I'm sure, are very pleasant and friendly, and some have outbursts, and some are just meaner and nastier than others. What constantly comes into my mind is the scene toward the very end of the movie Sling Blade, when the protagonist gets placed back into that special home. Some guy is being really just being inhumane, and he's talking about just very sick and demented, twisted things. And Sling Blade, lets the guy know, lets it be known to that other guy trying to talk to him that he's another resident of the home that was being twisted. He was letting that other guy know that he didn't want him to associate with him. But it's kind of like Sling Blade got put back into the home after that climax of the movie, and that same annoying, obnoxious, demented patient of that home started talking to him. Sling Blade finally spoke up and, let it be known to that sick inpatient, co-patient of his, that he didn't want to talk with him. And I forget what he said, but so it's kind of like that. I think that the fate of that twisted person who is this other resident of that home that Sling Blade finally told off toward the end of the movie after being asked to go back to that home, I think that's an example of what the fate ought to be for somebody who really loses. However, could somebody with mental challenges ever get the chair? If they truly knew what they were doing, regardless of their challenges, like I said, if they're clearly dangerous, then yes. However, if it's like another one of those Sling Blade movie stories, that's the name of a movie, by the way, that was released when I was a teenager. It was about some man with mental challenges, for those of you who never watched it. I personally never watched it all the way through. But he was in this home because he got put away for doing something. I don't know what it was, but he overall was a nice guy, but he just made a few bad decisions. I believe that in a case for people like the Sling Blade protagonist, my answer is no. I don't believe in capital punishment. However, for people like that just that nasty, demented, twisted other patient of that very home that Sling Blade finally told, he didn't want to associate himself with anymore, like, I don't want to talk with you anymore. I think that's an example of what the fate ought to be. But then, in the most extreme cases, it eventually comes to the point where you have to be a little bit cruel in order to take care of what needs to be done. It's kind of like there was this scene in one of the Lord of the Rings movies. I forget if it was Fellowship of the Rings or the Two Towers. I think it was the Two Towers, which is part 2 of the trilogy, where this king had somebody that had, used some black magic and was, like, using thought control. Finally, when that guy was making a run for it and trying to escape, that king, the same guy who ended up getting crushed by the horse in part 3, by the way, in that battle, he just let the man run away. And he came sniveling back to, I think, Moldor, like a really mean wizard. And Dad said that the king should have killed the guy while he had the chance. And it's difficult to do. I mean, it's not easy, but sometimes you have to. You know what I'm saying? Like there's this Callisto character from Xena Warrior Princess, a show that, along with Hercules, was part of a very popular Saturday night lineup when I was a teenager. The Callisto character was played by an actress I thought was pretty, but anyway, she was psycho. And eventually Xena had to make a very difficult decision where she had to just stand there and watch as Callisto, at point blank, sank beneath the surface of some quicksand. Right at point blank, Xena needed to just stand there and let Callisto sink. And that was very tough. And her conscience bugged her about that. You know, later in a future episode, her conscience was bothering her about how she just had to stand there at point blank and watch as Callisto sank. It was difficult, but it had to be done. And my answer to capital punishment plus mental challenges is it's a very difficult, one of those gray areas that gives me a similar reaction to that as I would toward abortion. It's a very gray area issue where the answer is not always yes and the answer is not always no. But Callisto, for instance, had there ever been a man or woman with mental challenges who was as mean and nasty as Callisto was on that Xena Warrior Princess show, then regardless of, even if she didn't really understand or have a true grasp on what she did, she should still be punished. However, if it's more like Sling Blade or something from that movie of the 90s, then maybe arrange something else. I don't know, I mean, I have a close to average IQ, so I'm not challenged mentally. I gotta say, though, in comparison to a lot of my family and friends and coworkers at any jobs I've gotten, compared to them, I suppose mentally I need to try harder because I live in a nice part of Massachusetts where the income levels are fairly high. I live in a very highly educated, highly well-off community. And to make enough money to be part of the upper middle class, you generally have to have plenty of education and thereby a fairly decent IQ level. So, consequently, a lot of the young men and women I hang around or that I went to high school with or college with, their IQs were, many of those individuals were up in the 120s, while mine struggled to make it past the lower hundreds. So I suppose mentally I was a bit challenged compared to a lot of my friends and family, but that's just because, not because my IQ's below average, but because it's below the average of a lot of the people I hang out with. But that does not impact how often or whenever I decide to be inconsiderate or be rude. I'm capable of learning. If you're capable of learning how to be better, then you're responsible. Sometimes when I get a little bit on the bitter side and I resent the way I get treated, or if I feel truly convinced in my mind that perhaps people are up my butt or people are always up my butt all the time, or they've always got their eye on me, or they've already disapproved of certain things about me, and I don't want them wandering around, I don't want them roaming around loose, then some of that bitter reaction, since I get treated this way, I start subconsciously wanting to see other people get treated that way. So it's like might as well drag someone down with me. In the heated moments when I get treated very strictly and authoritarianly, I get subconscious, in the heat of the moment, a subconscious desire to watch that happen to somebody else. My father seems to believe or agree that the stereotypical people person, quote unquote, would be quite the opposite. Whereas the more highly they become victimized to the whole, that they fall victim to the whole strict authoritarian, people always up their butts all the time, all the more determined they are to try and prevent that from ever happening to somebody else whenever they can help it. I'm the other way around. If people are mean to me, then I'm quick to be like, go, yeah, hey, wait, why is this person over here getting away with it and I can't? So, now that, I beg to differ, is not the Asperger's talking, that's me. Sometimes certain things that I do wrong are me, not the Asperger's. And I think that those tendencies toward jealousy is one of the things. But I just wanted to let you know, it really depends on the context of the situation. Do I believe that people with, say a mentality of a second or third grader should deserve to be put down if they do something heinous? Yes and no. Depends. On Sling Blade, for instance, that guy had more of a personality development. It's just something about him. But I think, though, that the only exception to this, and it's the biggest catch of all, is that whenever, if ever, a person is being held not accountable to the death penalty due to any form of mental challenges, in any instance of which, had not he been mentally challenged, he or she, they would have been put to death. In any such situation, they would need to still be removed from the rest of society and placed into what's known as a home, quote unquote, such as the one featured in the movie Sling Blade. There's basically almost like, how when people set up parole agreements or probationary agreement, that's the only alternative that stands between prison and freedom, is that they need to adhere to certain guidelines. Well, the strict guidelines that, you get to be kept alive but under the condition that you need to report to this home here and be kept away from the rest of society. I would not consider this theory to be cruelty on my part. It's simply because mental challenges is not an area of expertise for me. It's kind of like when my mother's father got it opposite. It's kind of like when my father's mother got Alzheimer's. And we didn't necessarily know how to handle Alzheimer's, so we needed to hire people who could specifically. I have no idea, Matt. Are you going to the basement, or where are you going? I thought maybe I'll go to the basement instead to get away, and then I'll decide to do this video. I'd do it outside, but the wind would mess it up. Well, now my reaction to the whole thing about removing the mentally challenged who would have otherwise been sentenced to death from society, I wouldn't consider that being a form of cruelty on my part. I wouldn't consider that to be a form of cruelty on my part. I just think that's not mental challenges is not my area of expertise. It's kind of like how when my father's mother, my Nana, got Alzheimer's. It's not that we didn't love her, but it's just that we needed to hire people who could hospice care, who could take care of her. That wasn't because we were negligent. It was because Alzheimer's, we're not professionals, we're not experts. We needed to get help in that. Although the hospice care sort of placed limitations on Nana when she had Alzheimer's, but it was, the limitations were just, well, they were inevitable, I guess. I am a very superstitious, very curious person who's very tolerant and accepting to the way things could, to the unusual, you know, such as that Lydia Dietz character from Beetlejuice. However, much of society is not that way, and so most of society is going to react more hostilely than I will. So it's only a form of protection, because see, the man or woman with mental challenges who committed the heinous acts, who gets dismissed from the necessity of having to be executed because of due to their mental challenges, I say that the only condition to that is that they still be removed from society. And I think that also protects their own safety and well-being as well, because they would be walking the gauntlet to be let out free. That would be protecting them from people, say, taking matters into their own hands and grabbing up their guns and rifles and stuff. You know, it's almost a protection. It's like back in the day when, you know, in the days of prejudice and racism, when black people, African Americans, would generally be safer in jail than they would to be let roam free, because then people would come after them. Many times even the law enforcement officials that were the very ones intended to look after them. So anyway, that's my say on should capital punishment be distributed to people with mental challenges? Yes and no. Very, very shaky ground, gray area, just as the topic of abortion is. And just as is the case for abortion, settle it on a case-by-case basis. That's what I think. Anyway, just saying, stay tuned. The next video will start shortly. So I have Asperger's syndrome, but the question of the matter is, how much of my behavior should I be held accountable for? And how much of my behavior should I be forgiven for? This is a tough area because my answer to this very question is highly dependent upon the mood I'm in at the point in time when I'm asked. It depends, it really does. The more that I feel oppressed and I feel like people are up my butt all the time, or the more I feel oppressed and I feel like people are always up my butt all the time, always keeping a close watch on everything I'm up to, and seeming to hint disapproval towards, the more strict and authoritarian my views are. Whereas the more happily socialized and satisfied I am, the more of an open mind and flexible thought process I have. It's kind of like when people's behaviors worsen, say when a parent gets employed to a new job that he or she finds very stressful of the situation. With the boss always up his or her ass all the time, or with the boss, say with the supervisor, who's always up your butt all the time, keeping an eye out on everything that you do and whatnot, and always indicating that maybe, always seem to strike up a controversial discussion behind your back over whether or not you are acceptable enough to be left alone and whether your behavior is good enough or not. It's only natural that some of those angers and frustrations from work are going to rub off at home. So I tend to flip-flop a lot. I tend to, it really does depend on what mood swing I'm in. But I am pretty steady to the idea that a person should be judged based on their intentions, not based on bigoted ideas and views. What gets very difficult is when the person with Asperger's syndrome becomes a victim of circumstance. When he or she does something that's not acceptable, and many of the members of society agree that the Aspie does not deserve a second chance entirely on the grounds that he or she has Asperger's syndrome, and that they need to pay up for their actions. And even though the person might learn from his or her mistakes the instant that they are made aware that they did something wrong, it's like, good, well, so you'll know better when you get out of jail 5 years later. It's just sometimes there's just, no matter what, it's too late. It's already been done. And the person gets deprived of the opportunity of several other different learning experiences, because the only way to learn from a mistake is to be disciplined legally, then that person's going to have a mile-long rap sheet by the time he or she finally learns to be half somewhat acceptable. So then I thought, the way I see it, and my experiences in life, is that if the person with Asperger's syndrome does not find a social club or clique or group of dedicated people who will look after the well-being of the individual without any social clique or group advocating for him or her, the Aspie will definitely have a higher likelihood of finding him or herself jailed. Because here's one of my pet peeves. It's sort of like in that scene in The Mask starring Jim Carrey, when the Mask asks, what are you going to do to me, Sarge? what are you going to do? And the cynical law enforcer said, I don't know, that's not my department. So, out in the world, it's like, yeah, but I didn't know how to act. That was not my job. You should have sought a clinician who could have trained you the proper ways to behave. And now, guess what? You just broke the law and you're being arrested. And so, sometimes I have a paranoid life view of feeling like if the person with Asperger's syndrome is not protected by a team of dedicated people, that person will not be able to keep out of trouble no matter how hard they try. It's not going to work. And the only way that the Aspie will learn right from wrong is by being punished. And I'm sure that the statement might anger plenty of members of the Asperger's syndrome community. So to clarify, I'll just say these are my fears. So I've been highly motivated to try to get the help I need. I've been unsuccessful to it. But I just think that people now, although people say it's never good to blame a disability on your downfalls, then why do people do it? Well, because whenever their disability, known as Asperger's syndrome, causes them to get into tremendous amounts of trouble, they get extremely anxious and extremely distraught. And in their mentally distraught state of mind, they get frantic. And that's what causes them, thus causing them to insist that they're different because they have Asperger's. They're really getting desperate. Looking back on the matter, it is true to a certain extent, to a certain degree, that without a certain amount of leeway, I will get disciplined in ways I'm not accustomed to. And that I would have gotten disciplined at some point or rather in my life if people were less forgiving. I have a poor perspective, so sometimes I'll go, maybe this person's always up my butt all the time. I might not know what I'm talking about, and then until I watch a movie where there is a true incident, of somebody who really was up somebody's butt all the time, always watching them, and then I could go, oh, yeah, okay, those people I was complaining about are pushovers. But without that perspective check, I'm always very paranoid. It's like I need to have a refresher of perspective. As of late, I've been involved in certain social events of which I have come in contact with people who have been less forgiving than what I'm accustomed to. It's just, no matter what, I'm always answering up for things I've done that I did without any awareness of boundaries and stuff. And eventually I developed a sense of doubt now about, I was always so confident. I felt like, obviously you're not going to have to worry about legal issues because I'm really mature. I'm very well behaved. Now, for the first time in my life, I'm starting to doubt myself and say, hold up. Why is it that I'm always getting involved in these very sticky situations? Well, maybe based on the situations I'm in, a much higher than average arrest rate would be because I don't know if any of you watching this video ever remember having a job where you had a supervisor who would always give you that dreaded call into their office where they would tell you make their point very clear that they have warned you on several occasions that you've been exhibiting a certain behavior or a work pattern or whatever that really needs to stop, and that they've warned you so many times, and then in a future office visit they start the inevitable beginning of the end starts, where they start asking you weird questions such as, where do you see yourself in 5 years from now here? What originally transpired, made you want to work for us? You know, and then later down the road, a couple weeks later, the supervisor might ask you, why should we continue your employment for this company? Try to convince me why you feel that you fit into our vision here. Now, well, when we hired you at first, I mean, we thought that you fit our image, and it's like every time that you get called into that supervisor's office, you are filled with dread. Like, you just at that point, you don't want to, you want to eliminate any interaction with that supervisor any way possible, because you know that anything the boss has to tell you can't be good. And your life, your income depends on that job. Anybody know the feeling I'm talking about, where, and then say as the supervisor is grilling you, there's certain other employees who always appear to be more etiquette and elegant than you are, and the supervisor gets along very wonderfully with the people and treats you like you're a nuisance. That kind of a situation, does that sound familiar to you? I have a feeling, and it's when placed in those types of life situations when my outlook on the way Aspies should be treated in comparison to people without Asperger's syndrome become a little more cynical. But when everything's going my way, my views are a little bit more positive. So it depends, it really does. I tend to become a little bit less seems the more I get bossed around, or I have to endure the strict authoritarian way, or what in my mind I'm convinced is being, the less reasonable I in return become toward other people with Asperger's syndrome. So again, I mean, the more I have to endure the strict authoritarian style of close probationary trial period type of zero tolerance type watch, the more that I get placed onto that zero tolerance probationary trial period strict authoritarian rule type of watch, where it's extremely easy for me to get myself into big trouble over my head, the more in turn cynical and less reasonable I would become towards the way I think that other people with Asperger's syndrome need to be disciplined. So in other words, if you get me all agitated and you put me in a lose-lose situation, I'll be very bitter and cynical. But if I can be in a successful situation where people, like, oh, throw Mark in jail? I don't think so. Like, oh no, where is he? He's in a jail cell? Get him out of there. We want to talk with him. Then I'll turn around and be like, oh, never mind. I was just mad before. And so people sense that my level of reasonableness tends to drop down into the cellar whenever life's not going the way I want it to, and they never let me go. It's like all of a sudden I strike a nerve that causes people to be up my butt all the time, and like up my ass all the time, and like completely have a very tight grasp on me and never let go. It's like just the anger, like the whole, like my father warned me when it's almost like in those CSI shows when crime drama programs where whenever the investment or investigators get somewhat convinced or think that somebody is somewhat responsible for a crime that had been taking place, they hassle the hell out of the person. They hassle the living hell out of the person. They don't leave them alone. They just hassle the crap out of them, and they don't let up. It's like very, very brutal interrogators and stuff, and they won't let up the pressure. And it's the instant that they have any doubt in their mind that a certain person is guilty of a crime, they're just up their butt every second. They're up their asses, and they're always investigating every little thing, every move the person makes. Nothing that the person says the person could say or do anything, and it's not good enough. Versus somebody gets to be calm and relaxed, and because they hit it big and they're earning a lot of respect and stuff. That's why I sometimes get a little bit bitter towards the way it is with, say, you get Miley Cyrus or Justin Bieber and stuff. They don't have to think much. The people love them, Nobody's up their butts all the time. People like them. And but just let it be known that it's not the celebrities that I get bitter towards. It's the way the arrangement is. So when I say about with the Miley Cyrus or something, now why the hell would I be angry with her? She didn't do anything wrong. It's not Miley that I'd be pissed at. It's the system that allows for people like Miley Cyrus to get worshipped every word that they say. Of course, I know that there is a cynical downside to the way Miley Cyrus is famous. She might feel that people are not taking her as seriously because she's famous. So, okay, I truly feel you there. I'm feeling you there. I know what you mean there. But I don't know, but I'll take your word for it. How's that? But it's more like certain people get worshipped and they get commended and they get congratulated. And it's no cop is ever in the right of mind going to arrest the person. As long as they're decent and they've got integrity and they've got common decency, the individual. No, they're going to get a lot of respect. Versus, I hate the impression of having this doubt in my mind that people are always up my butt all the time. They're always up my ass. They've always got me on a zero tolerance, strict authoritarian type of probationary trial period where they're always assessing me and wondering, should we allow this young man to continue being a part of society? That pisses me off. And that generally, in turn, turns me more strict and more authoritarian because I'm so frustrated with being treated that way that I want to see somebody else get treated that way. But then when people are nice to me, then I turn very nice. And it's that various mean streak about me that causes certain people to grab hold of me and never let go. Then they're always up my butt and they're always watching and waiting intently for everything I say. This is all in my head, by the way. This is not proven, but I'm just saying. They'll just grab you tightly and they won't let go of you. And they'll just I cannot let this guy get away with blah, blah, blah. And it's almost like I need somebody to destroy the natural course of things and actually let me limp away. Only not until way later with the person with the tight grasp over me going oh yeah, I guess I wasn't thinking. Oops. Well, I guess it's good nothing happened to Mark. Yeah, oops. Well, okay, I still like you anyway. I got something to say. I'll say it at the start of the next video. Peace out. well, no, I may not exactly be a diehard Christian or all that religious, but I know how to forgive. And if eventually, circumstances, I get a little bit of a break, fate cuts me a big old break, and people who were at first always up my ass all the time were to come back and apologize. I say, look it, dude, you don't even need to apologize. Now, truth be told, I'm not going to lie to you. If you come back to try and bust me, then I'll have to start up my old games again. I'll have to start getting angry with you again. But as long as you never do anything bad to me, then I won't have to get angry. And it's that lust for wanting to have a certain amount of control, and then have certain people place a very firm hand that says, no, you may not have that control, and I will fight within every power to not allow you to have that control. It's almost like you cannot grab this water bottle no matter what you do. You can do whatever you want, just don't grab that. And there's absolutely nothing you can do or say that will make me allow you to grab that and not get you into trouble. You have to respect this one command I make. And then it's like I get scared and I know the right thing to do is that they don't necessarily know what's best at that moment in time. And am I going to have the courage to be able to go against that command and actually be nervy enough to do that? But they're like, you better not. It's almost like one thing people do when they're really always up your butt all the time is they test your general ability to follow simple orders. They call that a test of your respect to authority. And they might not do that. They might only be doing that because you might have struck a nerve that really pissed them off. And so they want to test just how much you respect authority because they're trying to figure out something to get you in trouble for whatever it is. And they're getting creative with their methods of accusations and stuff. And that's when it starts getting a little bit creepy, a little bit scary, because then I don't know if I'm going to become one of those, part of those statistics of people with a higher likelihood of interaction with law enforcement. Sometimes people want to clean out society, and they want to rid society of those they feel have detrimental impacts to society. And so sometimes I think that I'm one of the people they're trying to get rid of. But I often need reminders all the time about, like, perspective checks. Like, Mark, that guy's not up your butt. You're just being paranoid. You want to see what it really would be like to have somebody up your butt? And then they show me they pop in one of those Jason Bourne movies. And I'm like, oh, yeah, well, when in doubt, at least I can feel rest assured that it's not like that. Things keep going awry, where I do things and I behave in certain ways that people take much more offense to than the simple forgetting to say please and thank you or whatnot. It's these bigger picture things I'll do that will upset people. And this is one of my aspects or characteristics where I'm always questioning how much of these behaviors are my Asperger's syndrome and how much of it represent what types of bad role models I've been around every so often. My mom works hard. She's got a master's degree. But she oftentimes finds herself coming home from work droning on about her complaints and inconveniences about her long day at work. but she'll never turn around and like ask me or show me some concern as to what I've been up to. She'll only turn around and like grill me for various things she's witnessed me doing wrong for a long time. And whenever I try in the slightest to criticize this, I get punished retrospectively from various people out in the community who would think it inappropriate the way that I am questioning my parents this way, particularly since I am living under their same roof. It's people who are very strong, have very strong opinions, and ones of which don't always coincide with my opinions. And these opinions come at random, and they usually come back with a vengeance to clobber me, knock me down for the count after I have stated plenty of assertions toward a certain topic of which are entirely oppositional to the stance of the other person in that same argument. So, in plain English, like when I said capital punishment of people with mental challenges, mentally challenged individuals, yes and no, just as is the case with abortions. It should be settled on a case-by-case basis. People might think you are sick. You mean to tell me you believe in putting down somebody with mental challenges? Shame on you. And I'll be like, no, I didn't. I said maybe they should just be put in a home and they should not be put down. And it's like, and the blah. And then somebody else would turn around and be like, you're sick. We had someone with mental challenges gun down one of our family members. Shame on you. If he's an animal, he should be put down. So no matter what I do, I'm always going to grossly offend somebody. And no matter how much I try to flip-flop and sort of weasel my way out of trouble, I'm still going to offend somebody. And it's always an unlucky guess. Always, whenever I go pure to heart and I don't allow for intimidation to sway me, and I go with my gut instinct on how I truly feel about stuff, more often than not, a very high percentage of the time, my views contradict the way that many people would feel. And it's like a horror show. It's like the worst possible way that things can go awry. And it's like in the movie Adam, how at the end he finally got to end of the movie, he felt like he was fitting in. That's never happened for me. But after a while, I just learned, just be freaking honest. Be flippin' honest. At least people give you more cred points for that, you know? The problem with me is my education level. Although I do have a college 4-year bachelor's degree, that's not a whole lot. Many people in this day and age have to have more than just a college degree. They have to have like a master's degree, PhD, additional education. Because a bachelor's degree is just not cutting it anymore. And so I might be lacking the respect because people take note that I don't have a whole lot of education. I don't know, I'm just trying to troubleshoot. One of the things I always wondered is, I always wonder the reasons for, my mother, people sometimes being, like my mom I'd tell Dad, I think I did something very bad, and then Mom will kind of slip into the room without me noticing. Oh, what did you do, rob a bank? And she'll like smile and think it's funny, and then start striking up a conversation with Dad, and to heck with whatever in the world it was I was talking about. Mom just comes right in and starts talking to Dad, and to hell with whatever it was I was talking about. My conversation didn't matter. And so it's at that point, these are the things that are very difficult for me to take, because it's giving me some indication that my rude conversational skills might not necessarily all be only Asperger's syndrome induced. But sometimes I worry when my mother is openly sarcastic, not nastily sarcastic, but open sarcasm. Sometimes I might not notice that she's being funny, or sometimes I sense that she really is being disrespectful. And she's like, "What did you do, rob a bank?" And then she starts striking up a conversation with Dad, completely off the topic of the one I was in the middle of. And I'm like, "Mom, I was talking with Dad," and then Dad said, "Mark, lighten up." And I felt like Mom was being rude, but I didn't really know. It's just sometimes I won't even really be able to conclude. I just don't have no clue whatsoever. No idea in the slightest whether Mom was really being rude or not, or whether she really is neglectful and abusive or not. And then it's at that point I need a perspective update where people go, "Mark, if she were neglectful or abusive, this is what would have happened." Then I can watch the role-playing scenario happen, and then I could feel a little bit embarrassed about myself and go, yeah. Then on that second thought, it's nowhere near that bad. But sometimes the damage has been done. The damage has been done that can't be undid. Or sometimes the damage has been done that can't be undone towards even hinting or thinking a certain way. Like feeling that maybe even having the second guessing or the doubt is bad, because it shows a mental instability in my part, thereby increasing the likelihood people are going to question me. But I've been trying to brainstorm, like, maybe I don't always know what I'm talking about, and I need a perspective recall to know exactly, like, okay, then I was being paranoid, obviously, or from abuse. And, sometimes it's not necessarily a matter of whether or not you're being abused or neglected, but it's also a matter of how you are communicating and working your way through these problems. Such as, like, that's why there's family counseling, because people don't, think of what would try to imagine a world where it was normal for people to, men and women, to witness people, complete strangers that they never even knew and that they don't know at all, to just run off with them and leave their family. And husbands to leave their wives, and wives to leave their husbands, for people they never met in real life, only because they're truly convinced that family is the family the other person is from, that they just met, is better than their own. We can't do that. That's why you got family counseling. I've been brainstorming various ideas that I don't know for certain. I'm only trying to think of anything I could possibly think of. And one defense I have towards my mother's open sarcasm is that maybe she's just made to feel a little bit nervous or uncomfortable by the way I'm different. And it could be embarrassment, maybe. Like if my mother was to attend one of those Asperger's meetings where it was all people with Asperger's and nothing else, maybe Mom would feel a little embarrassed. And sometimes embarrassment is a great barrier builder that knocks down or closes a lot of communication bridges, because if somebody feels too embarrassed or uncomfortable to open up and connect with people, then they build up walls. So I think my mother allows for embarrassment of, the weirdness and stuff of people with Asperger's syndrome, or I should say abnormalities or differences, to be more politically correct. My mom might see all of the differences and quirkiness, I should say, of all the people with Asperger's, and it might make her feel somewhat embarrassed. And embarrassment just kills a person's ability to empathize or connect, because if you don't feel comfortable, you feel embarrassed. It's like if somebody was to, for instance, just plot me in the middle of some event where people were going to make it extremely renowned that I've got Asperger's syndrome, I might feel embarrassed. And embarrassment, one time I was told back in the 80s when I was a kid that embarrassment is a form of anger. I might be so busy being embarrassed that it would be too difficult, my embarrassment from the overwhelming situation of me being plopped into a convention where it becomes widely known to everyone that I got Asperger's syndrome, and then there's some really corny thing with all this emotional, heartfelt music. My embarrassment of the whole situation and level of discomfort toward the whole overwhelming nature of the event might prevent me from being as connectatious as I could be. So I'm not connecting because I'm too busy going, you're embarrassing me. This is embarrassing, cut it out. And if you make people feel uncomfortable, they're going to close up. They're going to tighten up. They're not going to want to communicate as much with you. So, and I'm thinking that that's what happens with maybe my mom feels a little uncomfortable or embarrassed because she, for reasons I will not discuss in this video, has some mental blocks against hanging around too many people with social quirkinesses to them for personal reasons. And so she feels kind of embarrassed or overwhelmed by quirky stuff, quirky people. And so she gets made to feel uncomfortable if she's placed in an environment where there are a bunch of, say, Aspies homogeneously grouped, although particular Aspies that are very knowingly quirky, that have very, very obvious quirks to them. Now, note that it's easy to be sarcastic when you are embarrassed, because it's almost like the show South Park, for instance. The show South Park seems to harbor lots of open sarcasm because people are too scared or nervous. They're too nervous or scared to show weakness or show an overflow of emotion. It's almost like that school bus scene between the counselor, the school adjustment counselor, and the bus driver. It's like it was showing, oh, this is pitiful, kind of. But it's not necessarily mean, though. It's not as mean as, say, South Park, but it's a similar idea where it's like you think that it's socially cool and desirable to be agreed that these people are kind of strange, and it's hard to describe. I can't really describe it. It's not like they're mean and nasty, but it's kind of like they've got a subconscious desire to go with the crowd and hop on the bandwagon, for instance. Right, people get embarrassed and they feel an inclination to hop on the bandwagon, and that can sometimes disarm a certain sweetness. That's why the reason some people are quote-unquote sweeter than others, or extremely sweet. It's because, like, oh, she's so sweet. Yeah, because she has enough courage to avoid just simply hopping on of the bandwagon. She won't just hop on the bandwagon. She'll think with compassion, and that's pretty rare. Even I got to work on it some more.